So the story begins when Chen, Jack, and Lisa are getting ready to attack the supposed intruder. So in the first few pages alone, we kind of get a glimpse at the kind of climate and environment they're actually living in and how they managed to survive in it. So with the initial tracking of the intruder, the author kind of goes into a little bit of detail about the technology they use. So he says they have things like an immersive response goggles, or an impact exoskeleton, or a Hentasa Mark V engines, or mining bots, and TS-100s, and slash bangs, and whatever these are. But already from the start of the story, the author is kind of making the distinction clear that they don't live in the same reality as we do. They kind of are so dependent on this technology that they kind of require it to survive more dependent than compared to our generation. Believe it or not. So during their chase for the as they're chasing the intruder, they um at the beginning they kind of it says that they jump out of the Hentasa, and when Lisa lands, I believe Chen's the narrator, and he looks over, and on page 54 he notices that her femur ran through her thigh like a bright white exclamation point. So she obviously broke her femur pretty badly for her to be popping out with such a dramatic thing like an exclamation point. But she was completely fine. She continued their mission without a problem. She healed after not a long time, which kind of shows that their technology they have, it doesn't allow them to function the same way as we do. They actually alter their physical appearance. They no longer function with the same natural processes as you and I do. So they actually have several upgrades, if you want to call it. I don't consider them upgrades because upgrades is something you do to technology. You don't really upgrade a human. So I think just that mentality just speaks on the levels of what's going on in the story. But on page 54, it says that after dinner, we sat around and sharpened Lisa's skin, implanting blades along her limb so that she was like a razor from all directions. And then a little bit further down, it also says that Lisa had done my glow spine, a sweet tracery of lime landing lights that ran from my tailbone to the base of my skull. So they're kind of becoming less and less human with the more implants they put into themselves. They're kind of replacing their humanity with this science and technology that they think is necessary to survive. These alterations and these implants are now necessary and essential for their survival in this climate. They can't live without these type of upgrades. And so the story kind of it's looking at kind of like an aftermath of how the scientific method that we saw in previous classes and how important the adaptation of science was. But I think the story just takes it to the next level in the idea that they don't have the same balance that we kind of spoke about, the balance between emotion and science. I think they just lack all of that emotional aspect. I think they lost that balance, which kind of ruins their humanity and like the moral and the ethics and kind of the social side of things, because there's multiple instances in here that kind of show that they don't have those emotions, and I'll talk about that in a minute. They just don't believe that there's sentient. They don't believe themselves to be sentient beings anymore. And on page 62, sorry, say 62. There's Chen was in bed reading this piece of literature. I don't know exactly what it was, but it seems to be written by someone in their time, whatever year that may be. So it says in the book, it says, "Cut me, I won't bleed. Gas me, I won't breathe. Stab me, shoot me, slash me, smash me. I have swallowed science. I am God alone." So the image of cutting and slashing and stabbing was kind of present earlier in the story when Lisa broke her femur, and then there was one instance when they discovered that the intruder was a dog, and the dog kind of attacked Jack um, out of fear, was what I believe to be. And Jack kind of just cut off his arm without any hesitation because he knew that the technology had in him would allow it to grow back without any issue. And it didn't affect either of them. And the idea, it kind of speaks to the state of mind. The act of, the statement, swallowing science, I think is actually very telling about their state of mind and perspective in their new society, and what they believe life to be. I think you can't physically swallow science, right? So it has to be a symbolic or metaphorical analysis. But the act of swallowing is kind of personal. Like, you're ingesting it, you're allowing it to be a part of you. You're concrete. You're taking it in as your own. And so if you were, it's kind of like it's eating, right? So you eat to survive, you eat to live, you swallow your food. That's why I'm gonna analyze it. That's how I see it, as is you're swallowing it to survive. So them swallowing science, I think it's telling that the author of that piece of literature is saying you need this science to survive. Whether you stab them, shoot them, so they're not going to get hurt because they have this science to survive. And I think the idea of them, they they sorry, they require it now. It's a part of them, and they no longer. I think it just says that in combination with the phrase that they're alone. I think it's telling that they don't require those interpersonal relationships that most humans in our reality require so much. I think they're devoid of that now. I think with the science that they have now, they don't need it anymore. And then it says, "I am God." I don't think they're noting God as the religious symbol that most people recognize that word as. I think they're saying it as the like a powerful, all imposing figure, that being of just being the most, just having the most power over people. I think they believe themselves to be the strongest the strongest and most powerful version of a human. uh, and I think this only happened because of what happened to their environment. I think the severity uh, of the severity of how their environment was compromised, I think, really played a role into affecting their. I don't want to use evolution because that would imply just something different, like growth. But I think their progression and their upgrades, they're not human anymore. I don't believe them to be human anymore. I think they're more like a cyborg. And the science and technology has completely taken over everything. And then this new world has kind of been altered so drastically that when the author at the in I believe it was the first page, so page uh, um so when the author said that they were in Montana, I don't I don't believe that the image he described, it's not what I was picturing. When you describe Montana, I think of the mountains and the greenery and the scenery, the beautiful picturesque scenery. Like, that's what I expected to see. But it's actually kind of the opposite. So on page 53 to 54, Chen describes, he was looking outside and he described seeing mining robots rumbling back and forth, ripping deeper into the earth, turning it into a mush of tailings and rock acid that they left in exposed ponds when they hit the water table or piled into 1,000-foot mountainscapes of waste soil. And it's mountains, but it's just a different type of mountain. So the science that they supposedly can't live without has actually destroyed their natural environment, and it's destroyed the environment that so many are trying to protect today with the pollution and climate change, like Greta Thunberg. Like, it's kind of the aftermath if we let the big corporate companies take over and let them continue what they're doing. It's what's going to happen. And I think we see this the most when they take their trip to Hawaii. And the very first description on page 64, the very first description of the beach that they went to, it says Chen sees, it was good to walk along the beach holding hands while black waves crashed on the sand. So he's saying the ocean water was black, and I don't believe this to be at night. At one point he said that they were watching the sun go down, but and then and again he describes a bit late, like in the next sentence he says, Lisa was a good swimmer. She flashed on the same page 64. She flashed through the ocean's metallic sheen like an eel out of history, and when she surfaced, her naked body glistened with hundreds of iridescent petroleum jewels. The word petroleum, I think, is quite evident again that everything has been so industrialized, but not. It's not like the progression. It's kind of the downfall of when the industries have destroyed everything and polluted everything. It's kind of like the dump site of a construction site, or when you just dispose of everything. It's just what happens when you leave things out. I think the environment is like a scrapyard, and on the beach, when you expect the beautiful sands, there was actually on page 65. Chen's washing the dog, and he says, standing uncertainly on the beach, the dog was standing uncertainly on the beach, sniffing suspiciously at some rusting scrap iron that stuck out of the beach like a giant memory fin. This doesn't sound like the environment that so many people are trying to protect today. This is supposed to be Hawaii, one of the most scenic, beautiful vacation spots in the world that's known for its beaches, and yet this is an unlivable place with pieces of metal sticking out the ground and oily water, and it's unlivable. And this scenery, in combination with their modifications that they do to their body, it doesn't sound like the world it functions on those relationships anymore. It just sounds like everyone's a big cog in a machine of gears, in a gear system, and it's to keep the mining company and corporations running, and for science to progressing, but not to help people. I don't believe it's helping them. They do. It's evident that they do, where they can see themselves as gods and more than human, and they don't even need regular food to survive anymore. They can survive off rocks and sand. Like on page 65, it says, I fed her a handful of oily sand. That's all they need to survive at this point. And as they said from the old, Lisa at one point said on page 65 again, she said, looking at the dog, she said, it's a dead end of an evolutionary chain. So she said that because without the science they have now, she knows that that dog can't survive. She knows that that dog will not be able to survive in this climate, and I just think they've become so dependent on this technology that they've lost who they are as humans. I think they've redefined that definition, but they don't feel things anymore. Their lack of emotion is it's astounding. Sure, Chen and Lisa have sex, but I don't think it's because they feel anything. I think it's that animal instinct that humans they just do it for fun. They're bored. They do it for fun. I don't think they're in love. There's no evidence of that. They don't feel anything at all. Lisa wants to eat the dog all throughout the story. I don't think. I think the technology and the environment has had a severe impact on these beings. The destruction of the environment has caused the destruction and the loss of their humanity and the definition that of humans that we know today.